I got my part in Way of the Dragon. Actually, Chuck Norris and I were partners in a large chain of karate schools, and Bruce called Chuck. He loved Chuck Norris, and he wanted Chuck to be in his film, be the main bad guy. And so when he hung up, I said, "You're not going to Rome and Hong Kong without your partner." So I paid my way, flew over, got to Rome. Bruce says, "You're here." "Okay, I'll put you in the movie." And so that was really how I got my part. The way I was first introduced in Way of the Dragon, a.k.a. Return of the Dragon, was as Chuck Norris's student, which in real life I am. Chuck Norris is one of my instructors, my main instructor. And so I was the main bad guy until Chuck got there. And then Chuck was my senior. So I had to be subservient to Chuck and yet still do what I was required to do. And basically, it was the Gweilo, or the foreign devil, the non-Chinese, against the good guy Chinese. So it was the bad Gweilo, and so my character was that I was not a nice person, and that I was there to take advantage of the innocent, sweet Chinese. And so that's what we tried to get across.
Please! No, please!
Stop! Sensei, Bob's my student.
We were wearing uniforms, of course Bruce wearing his Chinese uniform and Chuck and I wearing our karate gis, and again it was Bruce's intent, because he was great about emotional content, to illustrate the difference between Chinese and the Gweilo, or the foreign devils, that we were portraying. And the uniforms were part of that, because clearly the Chinese wouldn't wear karate gis. And so it says, you know, anything but Chinese martial artists, whether Japanese, American, whatever, but it's a foreigner. And with the Chinese, they've been dominated by certain countries over the years. And of course, they're brilliant people and very educated people and very classy people. And so nobody likes to be overrun or taken advantage of. And so Bruce was able to bring that emotional content. I mean, in previous films, no Chinese or dogs allowed. In Way of the Dragon, if you look for the signs, you see a lot of things that stirred a lot of emotional responses in people. And so being part of that was very, very exciting, because you start to realize, even though it wasn't a very expensive script, it was Bruce's directorial debut, and seeing how much of himself he put into it. And then, you know, as I said, the physical location and the combination of all the elements that he brought together, I think, is what makes it so memorable. I got a good lesson on the set from Bruce once, because thinking, since he put me in, you know, obviously he didn't have a lot of dialogue and so on and so forth, but being a martial artist, I had to reverse everything. Number one, when you fight, you don't let somebody know they hurt you. Well, now all of a sudden, somebody's not going to hurt me, but I have to convince you that they did. So it's a reverse. And so one day I wasn't in the scene, I was sitting there reading a book, and Bruce came up and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Reading a book." "Why are you reading a book?" I said, "I'm not in the scene." He said, "You should be behind the cameras. You should be watching." He said, "Do you know what the camera's seeing?" I said, "No, I didn't think I should go around the cameraman." "No, you should be behind the camera, and you should be seeing if it's a hit. This is a team effort, and you should be trying to help." I never sat down again. So what did I do to prepare for the role? I picked up boxes. I helped the cameraman. I did anything it took to help the movie be better. For example, Bruce wanted to shoot it in the Coliseum. Couldn't get in the Coliseum. My wife's Sicilian. I picked up the phone, called a few relatives, and all of a sudden a little bit of money changed hands, and we were able to get into the Coliseum, which had been closed for health reasons. People, they thought it was too dangerous. So it was the first film shot in there in years. And so I prepared for it by working my butt off and watching Bruce, and anything he said, I tried to get really good at it. As a specific example, he taught Chuck and I how to take a hit, and he used to break the string line. And so if the hit comes here and I go, "Here's the hit," and I go, "Well, it's too soon, too late." So you have to do it right at the string line, right? And your neck has to be relaxed, and your knees have to be relaxed. You have to sell it. And so we worked hours at doing that. So mostly it was taking my martial arts skill, understanding that Bruce was the expert, following his lead, and being on your toes 24 hours a day if that's what he had you shooting.
Ha! Hey!
my experience with my character and Bruce Lee, yes, when we came back from Rome, most of my fight scenes were shot on the Kowloon side. Some of Chuck Norris's, but virtually all of mine. And it was very difficult because obviously, again, we had to put in long days. We drove quite a ways from the hotel we stayed at to get out there because it was right on the border of Canton province. You could actually see Canton from where we shot it. So number one, Bruce Lee and I both wore contacts. Well, we're wearing tennis shoes and we're in dirt. So when we kicked, boom, you got dirt. And so luckily Bruce had this great eye lotion called Darlin, and we used up a lot of it on that. But my experience with it was that Bruce wanted this character to be a nasty, no holds barred, would take any advantage. And so that was what I tried to get into the character, that he was a menacing, unholy, evil killer, and that Bruce had to be very careful. But Bruce just systematically took my character apart, of course, as it shows.
You, Tang Long. Tang Long.
Bruce Lee loved contact, and one of the reasons we developed I had known Bruce for 8 years by the time I did Way of the Dragon, so I knew him pretty well. We had trained a lot together. Bruce knew I was a professional fighter. He knew I was famous for taking hits, and he said to me, "Bob, I want to hit you, and I want to hit you hard." And I said, "Go for it." Great, terrific. And so we both agreed, and it was Bruce's vision, but we both agreed that making contact didn't leave any doubt about what your reaction was going to be. Because when you get hit for real, there's no fake reaction. And so while Bruce didn't hit you in the nose and break your teeth, but he sure hit you in the side of the head and certainly popped me in the body pretty darn hard. But it made it easier in a way if you could take the pain, but because people see it shot, they see it on screen one time. But you may shoot that scene 8, 9, 10 times. And so you're taking 8, 9, 10 hits, and sometimes 12 or 15, because Bruce was a perfectionist. He wanted it just right. And so there's so many elements in the timing of a fight scene. But I liked it, and Bruce liked it, and I knew I was there to make him look as good as possible, and it was fun. It's like, painting with Picasso, because Bruce was a genius. And so getting to just be around the master of what he did was exciting, and it created your energy and got your everything going, so that you gave a better performance just because of the experience of being around somebody like him. What stands out mostly about filming the fight scene with Bruce was the effort that he put in to make sure that the audience knew I was getting hit. And so if you look, you see my feet off the ground, then you know I'm getting hit. And so the realism came through because it was real, because while it wasn't full contact, it was hard contact. And so people look at it and say, "Oh my gosh." So today you see all this wire stuff and you know it's fake. And so if you're into that fake stuff, which I'm not, I can't stand to watch these films with all the wires on it. I mean, to me, it's you have to really suspend reality, and if that's your trip, great. But Bruce's films have stood the test of time. Here we're nearing the 30th anniversary of his unfortunate death, and yet he's still the master. Why? Oh, imagine what Bruce would have done had he lived over the next 30 years, because he was always ahead of everybody. My fight scenes with Bruce, again, Bruce always had everything worked out in his mind, and also had his little booklet of stickmen, and he created his character, so he knew scene by scene what he wanted to shoot and how he wanted to shoot it. So he told me how he wanted the character to react. Then basically we'd walk through the techniques that he wanted to achieve, and then the techniques that he wanted me to do. And so I would say that we worked on that. My fight scenes took up a good 2 weeks, and actually were very difficult, probably the most difficult in the movie, because Bruce finished all of Chuck Norris's scenes first. So Chuck left to come back. While Chuck was there, then I was there to watch the two of them and say, hit, good, no, reshoot that, you missed over here, whatever. Well, once Chuck was gone, Bruce was the only person that spoke English and Cantonese on that set. And so little things like I wanted cold water. And all day long I'm saying cold water, and I'm being brought warm Coke. Well, I don't care a lot for Coke and you know, when it's cold. I mean, I can drink it, but it's got to be cold. I can't drink it warm. So let me tell you, after 18 hours, we got into the van to go home. I said, Bruce, how do you say cold water, please? He said, oh, tung soi, ngoy. So I learned how to say tung soi, ngoy real fast. And that started me learning a little Cantonese. But it was 2 hard weeks, primarily because there was nobody there to tell us if it was a hit. And in those days, you didn't have the instant replay that they have today. So we'd have to go back and get it processed, and then very early in the morning, go look at it, see if it was good or bad, or if we needed to add anything, and then go out and reshoot it. Then there was no Chuck Norris there to watch us and tell us. So plus the dirt, plus the heat. So it was a job. Bruce demanded that everybody understand that on his movie set it was a team effort. But he also made it difficult in the sense that Bruce had a strong opinion about what he wanted on screen, and understand that he'd lived with it for months in his mind. So you get there and you're a white belt to his black belt when you start. But as we got into it, and fortunately for me, most of my fight scenes were shot at the end of the movie. I was there 3 months, all told, from beginning of end. And so by the time I got in 6 weeks and 8 weeks, I'd started getting a sense of what it was he wanted. So I was constantly telling him what I thought, 99% of which he didn't take. But at the end of the movie, he did something really phenomenal, because as I mentioned, he used to give us this Darlin eye lotion. It was kind of a mentholated eye lotion that we could soothe our eyes from all the dirt. And so the day I was going to leave, Bruce said, you know, I really feel bad, but you know, I'm doing everything, star, director, stunt coordinator, everything, editor, and so I can't take you to the airport. He said, I really feel bad. He says, but you've done a great job, thank you, you know, goodbye. So I got up early the next morning, they had a car pick me up, took me to the airport. I checked in, I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, huge crowd. I mean, like Elvis was coming. And I look up, and it's Bruce. I mean, he was just like the Pied Piper. I mean, just hundreds and hundreds of people around him, and he comes walking up, and he says, just kidding, here, and he hands me a case of Darlin eye lotion. Gave me a big hug. So that was Bruce. Bruce was just so loving and kind and brilliant, and was always needling you, and just like saying, I really can't come. Well, I believed him. I saw how hard he worked. I knew where he needed to be, and yet he took the time to come to see me off and to bring me the Darlin eye lotion. My experience in Italy was fabulous. I have to say that Chuck Norris and I had a great, great time, thanks to Bruce. Because Bruce, I've always told people that Bruce was a phenomenal martial artist. The world knows that. But if he had no martial arts skills, Bruce was a guy you'd love to hang with. He was fun, he was funny, he was bright. And I think the fact that his mother was Eurasian, you know, she was part German, so Bruce was 1/8 German, 7/8 Chinese. I think it gave him an insight into bridging the gap. So he was a lot of fun to be around, because he was my first close Chinese friend, my first close Asian friend. And so he was so bright and so funny and so much fun to be around that he made that experience in Rome be great. When, of course, added to it that it was my first film, Chuck's second, I'm going, hello, Mom, I'm in a movie. This is pretty exciting, heady stuff. And so you're filming at all these beautiful locations, and you're with somebody that you love and respect, and you're getting to be part of something that you think is going to be outstanding. So it was a lot of fun. Behind-the-scenes stuffs were very interesting. Specifically, getting into the Coliseum, which I helped Bruce arrange, was breathtaking, because you realize this is thousands of years old. This is where lions ate Christians. I mean, it was incredible, and get to tour that. What was exciting for me personally was watching Bruce and Chuck, two brilliant martial artists, interact, and the excitement that they got of actually being there. And then it was the discussions between Chuck and Bruce, because Bruce respected Chuck so much that obviously Chuck is undefeated world middleweight champ, and a wonderful human and very humble. And now he's got this energetic Bruce, and Bruce was anything but quiet. He was very, very just filled with energy. And Chuck is more of a low-key guy. But seeing how Bruce brought up Chuck's level of energy and excitement was exciting. And watching them talk about how the characters should be done, and Bruce was it was very important to him that he show on film the respect and love he felt for Chuck. And so even though he had to kill his character, he wanted to get that respect across. And I think that's one of the things people like about the fight scene. So it was discussing things like Chuck's very hairy. What do you think, Bruce says, about ripping your hair off? Well, and he actually ripped some hair off. So, you know, Chuck had to say, oh, well, it's not going to feel good, but okay if you think so. So I could talk about that question for hours. There was so many things, but let's try to capsule it for you. It was just the excitement of being next to and watching those two interact. I personally think it's one of the great fight scenes of all time, and for a lot of different reasons. I'm not for The Wire, and so I believe Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee's fight scene in Way of the Dragon was a classic for a variety of reasons. Number one, Bruce starts off losing, and he has to adjust to the apparently superior power of Chuck Norris, and he has to adjust his timing, and then shows the audience that by adjusting, that he could, even though he was a smaller opponent, beat a larger, stronger opponent by using angles and movement. Secondly, then, I think the way he did the fight scene, they both showed each other respect, but they were warriors, and they were there to fight each other, one of them to the death. And so the way Bruce communicated it, I also think the athleticism that they both showed in the flexibility scenes, and Bruce, you know, showing his amazing physique and the way he stretched his cat. He created almost a cat-like appearance. And so there were so many things about it that were unique, ending with, obviously, with him ripping hair off of Chuck's hairy chest, and then ultimately when Chuck's character is killed, laying the black belt on him. Well, I thought it added a lot of emotional content, something that Bruce was a genius about. If you think about the time of it, it was filmed in 1972. And in 1972, there had never been a martial arts film where they went on location. So it's filmed in Rome, pretty dramatic, magnificently gorgeous city. So you've got just the location alone. And then put in that it's filmed in the Coliseum, which people had never seen. And this is the ultimate site for warriors. If you're a warrior, and these two were warriors, think about the drama. So it was dramatic in that its setting. Then you add two of the great martial artists of all time together, and the curiosity of how they would do this and who would win and so on and so forth. I think it made it very, very exciting and very, very interesting. A Bruce Lee film was a Bruce Lee film, and he really took charge of it. He had a vision. I mean, even down to the fight scenes, he did little stickmans, and he walked everybody through it. And so, yes, he wanted you to make your contribution, and yet 99% of what you said, he listened to it but didn't do it. But yet he wanted you always to be suggesting things to him. But Bruce has had his own way of wanting you to suggest things. For example, when we first left Rome and we got to Hong Kong, now all of a sudden we're on a set. And so the fight scene was Chuck Norris and Bruce. And in the beginning of the fight scene, Chuck is winning. And Bruce has got his hands down, just taking the hits, you know, and I go, right after the scene, I said, hey, Bruce, I said, you ought to put your hands up and block some of those, because even a beginner, slap him in the head, he's going to put his hand up after that, right? And he says, have you starred in films that have made millions of dollars? And I go, who are you talking to? Because I'm his friend, right? He got up real close to me, and he, real quietly, he said, inscrutable Chinese must not be embarrassed in front of other inscrutable Chinese. And he said, so what he was really telling me was, if you got a suggestion or correction, tell me privately. Don't tell me in front of people. Well, years later, I realized that's absolutely correct. If my boss chews me out in front of a bunch of people, I'm embarrassed. And so he was the Bruce Lee guy, but a Bruce Lee film was a Bruce Lee film. When Chuck Norris and I arrived in Hong Kong, obviously we came with Bruce, and as soon as we hit there, there was all the local newspapers saying, you know, Wing Bang Lo, whatever his name was, challenges Chuck Norris to a fight and all this kind of stuff. And so we knew it was just locals trying to get some press. But Bruce said to Chuck and I, hey, just ignore it, because I beat one up and then there's 5, and I beat 5 up and there's 10, I beat 10 up and there's 20, so you just got to ignore him. And so he left. And so, but the press is still around, and Chuck was upset about it, somebody challenging him, and he's not accepting. But Bruce made him promise that he wouldn't accept any challenge. And so as soon as he left, I said, well, he didn't say anything about me. They didn't challenge me. So I went out to the press and I said, well, you know, I'm Mr. Norris's student, and so I'll accept all death matches. We're going to be on a show called Enjoy Yourself Tonight in a week, and I'll fight anybody to the death. Come on down. But I want to do it on TV. I want to do it on live TV, so there's no BS about I got 3 friends with pipes to beat you up. I'm going to kill you on live television. Come on down. So a week later, 3 of us went down, thousands of people around, and everybody expects there's going to be a half a dozen challenges or more, and we get there, and nobody wants to step out there on the live stage for a death match. And so all of a sudden, the producer, thinking he's going to have this great event, now doesn't have anybody willing to step forward, including Wing Bang Lo, who made the challenge. And I said, because I'm saying, if you can beat Chuck Norris, a student, then you got a right to fight him. And so all of a sudden they said, you got to do demos. And so now Chuck is really psyched up, and he is a great, great fighter. He's the greatest martial arts fighter of all time, in my opinion. Undefeated middleweight world champ. So he gets out there. Well, I'm his student, so he's going to start doing a demo. So he's doing the demo, and he's just beating the shit out of me. I mean, he's just flat nailing me. And so he does a combination, bam, 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 hands, feet, and all of a sudden jump spinning back kick, boom! And he hits me, and I start flying, and all of a sudden I realized there was a screen around us, and I grabbed this black curtain, and I looked down, I've got 20 feet of steel I'm falling down into. Oh my God. And Chuck realized it at the last second, grabbed my gi, and I fell down on the floor, and then he pulled me back up, and when he did, he pulled my gi open. Well, there was welts all over. So the camera came in real close, audience real quiet, and after that, everywhere we went in Hong Kong, they go, ooh, my Chinese name was Wu Lobet. And they said, Wu Lobet, ooh, ooh. And they wanted to hit me everywhere we went. Were there any fight scenes or any other action scenes? Yes, that didn't hit the theaters. There's always things, because number one, you've got a time limit. So Bruce knew whatever his time limit of that film was, and so I am sure there was a lot of good stuff that didn't make it into the film. But in the end, Bruce was the editor. He was in there, and he knew what his vision was, and he was just like a pile of fruit. He reached out and picked the pieces that he wanted to put together. So yes, there's plenty. I believe only whoever owns it now would know, but I would have to guess there's a couple of hours at least of scenes that never did hit the final cut. Was Bruce nervous about the outcome? He had a lot of responsibility, yes, but he loved his partner, Raymond Chow, and they'd created their partnership, Golden Harvest and Concord being Bruce's production film, with the main asset being Bruce Lee initially. But yes, I think Bruce put a lot of this pressure on himself, because obviously he admired what Raymond Chow had done and was, but he also realized this was kind of his coming out party, because now he's taken over the direction and the starring and the writing and so on and so forth. And so I don't think that nervous really hits it as much as stressed, because he was a perfectionist. He wanted it to be great. And so I think when we first got there, he was so happy to see us that got rid of some of the nerves. And then I think he was, once we were able to get him in the Coliseum, he was nervous until then, and then that released some of that. But Bruce was a genius at utilizing his nervous energy. And so I think he did put a lot of responsibility on himself, but he handled it very well. Bruce wrote, starred, directed. I mean, we used to kid him and say he was everything from the janitor, chief bottle washer, besides being director, producer, star, action coordinator. And I tell you, it was exhausting just watching him. Bruce was so dynamic, but he was so happy that he had finally been given this opportunity, that the stardom of his first 2 films, each of his films broke the previous box office record all time. And so he had the pressure on him of, A, this is his 3rd film, and he's got to break that box office record. And he also, his ego, he wanted it to be better than the last one. And so I think, personally, he took on too many jobs. That was just the load. But the budget was incredibly low. A lot of people don't know the budget was only $250,000 for Way of the Dragon. That's a very small budget. And you consider how much had to be spent just shooting in Rome. So he had to be efficient. And that meant he had to shoot long days. So we literally shot lots of 18-hour days because of that. So it was exciting, but when we'd go home and go to bed, Bruce would still be writing and preparing for the next day. And so you could see him wear down, although Bruce was virtually indefatigable. The reality is he really put a lot on him. So it was a mixture of admiration and a mixture of "you're nuts, guy," and which we told him a few times, you know, but he said, "No, I just got to make this great." So it was exciting. I guess if you kept saying one word that came around Bruce, it was exciting. It was always fun and it was always exciting, but it was tiring. You know, I was very impressed with Bruce because Bruce, first of all, Bruce was a genius, and he was a genius on a lot of levels. Mostly the world knows him as a martial arts genius. But he had 20 films he made from the time he was 5 until he was 18. So, and his father was a brilliant comedic actor. So he was around the business, and he really knew the business. He knew camera angles and so on. And so what I liked about it was Bruce's third film as an adult, but it was his first and only comedy. And I liked the part that it showed that humility that Bruce had. Bruce was known as a cocky guy, which he was, but he was also a very humble guy mixed in with his cockiness. His cockiness was more to tease you, to get reactions out of you. But I thought it was a great portrayal. He's playing a Chinese bumpkin who doesn't speak the language in Rome and got to solve problems. I mean, his problems as basic as just eating. And so I thought it showed a very interesting side of Bruce, and I was thrilled to be in it. My impressions of Bruce Lee as an actor, writer, director, producer, it was amazement. But Bruce, it showed me how knowledgeable he was and how intimately involved he was. He was also the editor. I mean, he lived in that editing booth. And Bruce was a genius. First of all, he was the first one that I ever knew of to shoot master. And he'd shoot a master, and then he'd always have 3 cameras, low, medium, high, and he'd shoot different angles. And he shot lots of coverage on everything. And so I would say if I had to pick one word to describe it, would be admiration, because he was so talented, and yet, so he could put a lot on himself and still carry it off. And yet I thought, in a way, he was kind of dumb to take so much on himself. Turned out I was right, I was wrong, and he was right. Well, to all the fans that Bruce Lee has worldwide, and I think his fan base is probably bigger than it's ever been as younger generations begin discovering him, and obviously there's that emotional feeling that, gee, I wish I'd known him. I've had so many people say, oh, you're so lucky you got to know Bruce Lee, and they're right. So I would say that while we've lost Bruce Lee, and sadly his son Brandon as well, what you really need to focus on is how lucky we are that we had him. How lucky we are that we had him for the 32 years that we had him. How lucky we are that we have the 20 films he made as a kid and the 5 films that he made as an adult. And how lucky we are that at least he lived long enough to do Way of the Dragon and his 2 subsequent films, Game of Death and Enter the Dragon. So I think if we focus on the positive, on the fact that at least we had him long enough. Did he get to fulfill his genius? No. Did he die too young? Yes. But I would say that I personally am honored and thrilled and happy and I'm blessed that I got to be in 3 Bruce Lee films and that he was my friend. So I think they have to focus on what they have, and what they have is projects just like this, where there's still a lot of people out there that love Bruce enough that they'll go to the expense and the trouble and the time to produce epics like this that give maybe a little more insight and eliminate a lot of the BS that was created by films like Dragon, which I personally don't think really did Bruce any justice. It wasn't accurate, but at least focus on the positive, the fact that we had him and that he did do what he did do. Way of the Dragon has been considered one of the most influential martial arts films of all time, and I believe the reason it stood the test of time, I mean, we could spend hours, but to capsulize it, A, Bruce Lee, B, Bruce Lee, C, Bruce Lee, and then, so he's magic in a bottle, so you're getting to view that magic in a bottle. Bruce was a martial arts genius. Bruce was a filmatic genius. He knew better than anybody, in my opinion, how to capture the best he had to offer on film. He was a master at capturing emotional content. He knew what would piss people off and what would make people cry and what make people laugh. And so it's not just a physical thing with him. Bruce was like a panther, like a cat, like a magnificent animal, that he had this dynamism, and yet he married that to the Nureyev kind of balletic moves that others before and since have never really been quite able to capture. And so all of those things brought together. Bruce was, like I said, such a fun guy to hang with, and that comes across on screen. You say, boy, I'd like to know that guy. And I think that it also, because that, in my opinion, that film is what really made Bruce Lee an international star, and he was the first Asian man to become a leading man. Women looked at him and said, what a great-looking man. It didn't enter their mind that he was Chinese or Jewish or Italian or Irish. It entered your mind that he was a brilliant, great-looking, appealing, charming man with the devil in him. I mean, he was a confident, cocky, loving, lovable, kind, dynamic human. And so I think it's how could it fail? How could it not be? And then Bruce's genius about putting the whole thing together. He had a great partner who gave him hands free, so it really became a stamp. Well, after all these years, as I say, it's over 30 years now since we did, because it's 2003 now, and we did that film in 1972, Way of the Dragon, a.k.a. Return of the Dragon. And so looking back on it, obviously, I loved Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee was like a brother for me. And I admired Bruce, I loved Bruce, and I'm so happy that I forced myself into the first film, which fortunately then I guess I did a good enough job. I got 2 more after that. But I look back and say, doing those 3 films, I had no idea. Honestly, if you'd have asked me then, I would have said Bruce Lee's going to live to be 120, because he ate a great diet, he was a great athlete, he was so dynamic. I mean, he was the kind of person you couldn't imagine ever not being here. Well, unfortunately, he died so young at 32. He was taken so quickly, so that it's a tragic loss. And I'm sure the world believes that. His fans understand, they miss him and so forth. But as a friend, I miss him a lot. So when I look back, I say, thank God I did those 3 films, because now it's part of history, and it captured his magic. And so just to be part of Bruce Lee's magic is a very exciting thing.